Whether you've arrived here because you want to get certified in AWS or just go deeper in your AWS knowledge, maybe you've taken our Essentials course and want to learn more. Whatever the reason, you need to understand that AWS is absolutely exploding. 80% of companies use AWS in some way today. And 2 years ago, growth was predicted to be $160 billion by 2020. Guess what? Now that same prediction is $411 billion by the same time frame. So why would you want to get certified instead of just getting the knowledge? The answer is it pays 27.5% more than non-certified people in the same positions. There's an explosion of jobs that are telling you they want AWS certified individuals. And it goes right back to improving your knowledge. This course prepares you for the AWS Solutions Architect Associate exam, and it helps to prepare you with a solid foundation for other certifications as well. Welcome to this AWS Solutions Architect course. My name is Tom Carpenter, and I've been working with AWS for many years now, and in the IT world for even longer than that. I've been around the IT world for almost 3 decades, and it's getting really close to that number now. And in that time, I've seen an awful lot of things come and go. But you know, one of the things that looks like it's here to stay for a long time is the cloud. We are seeing the benefit of moving things into the cloud like never before. See, the cloud first came on the scene over a decade ago, but it's really been in the last 4 or 5 years that we've seen a massive explosion in the utilization of the cloud, and it's only going to continue to grow. So the benefits of this course are just tremendous for anybody that wants to work in the IT of the future. This course is specifically for anyone who wants to understand AWS in general, because that's what the Solutions Architect certification does for you. The Solutions Architect Associate certification helps you to understand AWS as a general tool set for implementing technologies in the cloud, and it's useful for beginners all the way through to experts. Now keep in mind that this particular course has been updated for the 2020 exam release. And so what we've done is we've added new episodes, completely and entirely new episodes on new concepts and topics. And we've even added to some of the existing episodes that were there before. So you've got fresh content on what AWS looks like in 2020. In this course, we're going to go through all of the domains for the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam. And so in that process, we'll cover Domain 1, designing resilient architectures, the ability to implement solutions in AWS that can be resilient against faults, failures, and even security incidents. That makes up about 30% of the exam. And then Domain 2, designing high-performance architectures. So we don't just want them to be resilient, to stay there when we need them there, but we also want them to perform very well. This makes up about 28% of the exam. So we'll get into the different topics that help you to build these high-performing architectures, like using replica databases, like implementing clustered EC2 instances, and many more topics. In Domain 3, we'll talk about how to design secure applications and architectures, and that'll make up 24% of the exam. So in this course, we'll get into the issues of security that are introduced in AWS and how we deal with those situations using the tools provided. And finally, in Domain 4, we'll talk about designing cost-optimized architectures, which is 18% of the exam. How do we implement the things we need in AWS without paying more than we have to pay? And it's really great, in my opinion, that the folks at AWS have decided to actually include in their certification that you have the ability to do things as inexpensively as possible within AWS. To me, that says a lot. And I really like this portion of it because I like to save money when I'm using cloud technologies. So we'll go through all of this and more as we go through the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate course together. As we continue looking at AWS, I want to answer a very important question, and that is, why would you use AWS in the first place? I mean, there are a lot of options out there when it comes to cloud providers. There's Microsoft, Google, and others as well, and of course, AWS. Well, the very first reason is the popularity of AWS. AWS is by far the market leader. 34% of the market in Q4 of 2018 was owned by AWS. Microsoft was in second place with 15%. So that tells you the big difference there in the market share. Google and IBM had 7% each. So by far, AWS is the market leader. Now, that leads to some other things like being the most in-demand certifications for cloud services. And the other thing to keep in mind is that there's some really big companies that use AWS. Did you know that Netflix is hosted on AWS? Other popular solutions like Reddit and Pinterest are running on AWS. So they trust it with massive demands that are required of their services. Businesses from more than 190 countries actually use AWS today. In addition to the popularity, there's the reality of the many available services that AWS has. More than 20 service categories are provided by AWS, and that's just the categories. These categories include compute, database, Internet of Things, storage, security, business analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning. It just keeps going. And there are more than 180 individual services that are listed in the AWS console. They have 69 availability zones in 22 different regions around the world. So in addition to being very popular, AWS probably gives you what you need. Now there's a third major benefit, and that is the learning materials. There are massive amounts of learning materials available for AWS. First of all, they have thoroughly documented services right in the AWS documentation. Some of the best documentation I've ever seen. We'll take a look at it later on in this course. There are also thousands of blogs out there that deal with AWS. There's e-learning like ours that helps you not only with certifications, but after you go through our AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate course, you will understand AWS in a way that you can actually use it well. And there are dozens of books in addition to this. So the moral of the story is that there is a wide support base for AWS out there today. So when you're ready for a cloud solution, AWS is a really good target for you. Okay, I want to jump right in. We're going to see how to get started with AWS. If you want to get certifications in AWS, you need to use it. The problem many people fear is that it's going to be expensive. How do I get my hands on AWS to use it? The good news, it can be absolutely free. You have to be careful how you use it to make sure it stays free. And even when you use some of the paid features, if you use them just a little, it'll cost you just a few dollars every month. So I'm going to show you right now how to create an AWS account so you can get started with it. And we'll go ahead and create our first thing. We'll create an S3 bucket just to see how it's done. The first step to learning AWS is to get started using it. And to do that, you'll need to create an AWS account. Go to aws.amazon.com and click Create an AWS account. When you click on this option, you'll be asked to sign up with an email address. Simply enter your email address, password, confirm the password, and provide an account name that you want to use for the account. And then click Continue. Now you'll need to select the account type. Since you're using this for learning purposes, I would go with a personal account. So you'll enter a phone number that can be used for validation, the country or region and your address, and finally, check here to indicate that you've read and agreed to the terms of the AWS customer agreement. Click Create Account and Continue. Now you will need to provide a credit or debit card in order to set up the account, but they're not going to charge it unless you go outside of the free tier limits. So you will want to be careful to use only free tier things if you don't want to be charged. So I'm going to go ahead and enter credit card information and click on Submit. The next step is to get a verification code. You can use a text message or receive a voice call. In most cases, you can just use a text message to a cell phone number. Enter the CAPTCHA information and click on Send SMS. You should receive a code within a few moments. Enter that code into the box and click Verify Code. Once you've been verified, click Continue, and then simply go ahead and go with the free basic plan. And that's really all there is to setting up an account. Now you can personalize your experience to receive recommendations, or you can simply click up here to sign in to the console. Enter the credentials you used when you created the account. And you should be able to sign right into the AWS console. Now, I understand that you won't fully comprehend what I'm about to demonstrate here because you haven't gone through the full e-learning course, but I want you to see how easy it is to create something within AWS. For example, if I want to create an S3 bucket, I simply need to expand all services, go to Storage, S3, and I'm immediately in an interface where I can create a bucket. An S3 bucket is a place where you can store data files in the cloud. So I click on Create Bucket and enter a name for the bucket. The bucket name does need to be unique. I'll call it Training 101 First Bucket. Now it will validate that that is a unique name in all of AWS. We'll click Next to let it validate that. Since it went on, it means it's a unique name. We can also choose to enable versioning and other features as well. I'm not going to worry about all these details. You'll learn about all those details in the full course. So I'll click on Next, and we'll go ahead and default to blocking public access and click Next, and then click on Create Bucket. And just like that, we have a bucket. Now we can click on it, and you'll notice we can upload files to it and take other actions. So now you've seen how to create an AWS account, how to create an S3 bucket, and really just start using the interface. As you can see, it's pretty simple to get started with AWS. So here's my suggestion to you. Before you ever start into our full AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate course, get your account created so you can do all the same things that I show you how to do in that course. That's the best learning plan. We're going to turn our attention now to the AWS certifications themselves. And before we get into the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate specifically, I want to show you the entire ecosystem of AWS certifications. So we're going to take a look at the AWS certifications page and see just what Amazon has to offer here. To learn about AWS certifications, simply go to aws.amazon.com/certification. Here on this page, you'll get an overview of the certifications available from Amazon Web Services. There's a What's New section that's generally available, and then the certification overview, which lets you see links to exam prep resources, certification benefits, and AWS recertification. And then here's the part I really want us to focus on in this brief video. Available AWS certifications. There are 3 levels and specialties. The 3 levels are foundational, associate, and professional. And there are specialties in very specific areas. The foundational cloud practitioner is someone they define as having 6 months of fundamental AWS cloud and industry knowledge. The associate is someone they define as having 1 year of experience solving problems and implementing solutions using AWS cloud. And the professional is someone with 2 years of comprehensive experience designing, operating, and troubleshooting solutions using the AWS cloud. Our full AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate course covers this exam, the Solutions Architect Associate exam. It is an associate level. So they suggest having 1 year of experience solving problems and implementing solutions using the AWS cloud. But I'm just going to warn you, if you worked with AWS for a year, but you did not go and fill any gaps in your knowledge, you will not be able to pass the exam. The reality is that 1 year of experience in all of the knowledge areas that are required by the exam is what you need. And without that, you wouldn't be able to accomplish it. That's the benefit of e-learning, because e-learning allows an expert to tell you, hey, here's the stuff that had you spent a year working with this, you would have learned in this particular solution within AWS, whether that be S3 or EBS volumes or Elasticache or what have you. The professional level, I would suggest you do want to have 6 months to 1 year of hands-on experience working regularly with AWS, and make sure you get a good educational tool to help you along the way. Now, we not only have the architect track, but we also have the operations and developer track. So for those that might want to become SysOps administrators, more practical what you do instead of designing, planning, and problem solving. And then there is a developer track as well, where you can study development. And then there's the DevOps engineer professional. So developers are basically those who write code that runs in the AWS cloud, taking advantage of AWS services like Lambda and code deployment tools that are in the system. The specialty areas include advanced networking, big data, security, machine learning, and Alexa Skill Builder. And they add more of these over time. So you can expect to see more of those added as you go along. So this gives you an idea of the general certifications that are available with AWS. Clearly, Amazon offers a lot of different certifications for AWS. So the question is, where do you start? Well, you don't have to start all the way at the bottom. You can start at the cloud practitioner level if you wanted to, but you can start at the associate level for any of the paths you choose to take. The AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate is actually one of the best places to start. It's the most popular certification, and it offers you a good broad perspective of what AWS has to offer. So that's where I recommend beginning, and then you can continue your journey from there. But make sure you have a plan that's going to get you the knowledge you need to succeed as a cloud practitioner. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the resources that are available to you as you prepare for your AWS certification. It's good to have the right tools in place so that you can get the knowledge and skills you need to be prepared for the questions that will be on the exam. The first thing is our AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate e-learning. This is going to take all of the objectives for this certification and bring them together for you in a logical way to understand and learn about them. Sometimes when you see objectives for certifications, and I've worked with literally dozens of different certifications throughout my career, and in addition helped build many certifications throughout my career. And what I've found is when you look at those objectives, they're not always listed in the best learning order. They're listed according to knowledge domains, and you might actually be better off learning about some things in multiple knowledge domains at the same time, and then going back to learn the rest of one of the other knowledge domains. So the key is to have a good learning path, and our e-learning gives that to you. The second thing is there are many books out there that are available for the certifications. I always recommend use multiple resources if they're available to you. If you don't fully understand something from one resource, look it up in another, and then you'll get the best learning experience. You also have videos at Amazon. Their videos are very brief usually and scaled down, but they do have videos available on the different topics that are covered in the certifications. You also have practice tests. These are great to test where you are in your knowledge of AWS. And finally, there's the AWS documentation. Yet one more resource that you can use to make sure you fully understood the concept that you're studying. So take advantage of all of these preparation resources on your journey to certification success. Now, before we go any further, I want to spend some time talking to you about the benefits of getting certified. A lot of people question, is there really a benefit to getting a certification? Isn't it really just about the knowledge? Well, let me preface all of my future comments by saying that the most important thing is the knowledge. I'm a big believer in having the knowledge needed for success. It doesn't matter if it's in leadership, in business skills, or in technical skills. You've got to have the knowledge, but that's just the beginning point. Proof of knowledge is also beneficial. And this is how a lot of employers use certifications. They say, well, we want to make sure they know this level of AWS. So how do we prove that? Sure, we could ask them a few questions in an interview, and they're going to do that as well. But if they have a certification, they already have some proof of knowledge. So that's a great benefit. The other one, linked right back to what those employers do with certifications, is job opportunities. You'll notice many postings that say that in order to get the job, you have to be certified with AWS, or you have to be certified with Microsoft or something else. So certifications can not only get your foot in the door for the interview, but they may just be required to have the job in the first place. If you already have a job working in the industry, many organizations will give a pay increase, a bonus, or a permanent pay increase based on acquiring a certification. And the final thing is confidence. When you prove your knowledge, it boosts your level of confidence in your ability to work with a system, in your ability to troubleshoot a system, to implement solutions in a system, or any of these things. So there's a great benefit in starting with knowledge, but ending up with confidence, because that confidence lets you know I can tackle the situation and I can get the job done. I know I can figure out how to do this. And that's a big thing, because many people don't take the step because they lack the confidence. They don't jump in to try to solve a problem or take on a new challenge at work because they lack the confidence that they'll be able to do it. But by gaining the knowledge, proving the knowledge through a certification exam, bringing those two things together, it gives you confidence that you can indeed tackle any situation related to that solution. So make sure you remember these benefits. They'll give you motivation as you go through the certification process. Now, let me give you some exam tips to help you to prepare for and take your exam. First of all, I want to tell you, go schedule your exam. What? That's right. Right now, before you watch this course, go ahead and go schedule your exam. If you feel like you need 30 days to prepare, schedule it for 30 days from now. If you feel like you need 90 days, schedule it for 90 days. Schedule the exam, then start your study. And that'll motivate you to go take that exam. But where do you do it? Simply go to aws.amazon.com/certification and click on schedule exam. Do it. Seriously. Right now. Pause the video. Go schedule your exam. It'll give you the motivation to get on through it. And when you're done, come back here and click that little button that says play. All right. Now that you get the exam scheduled, where do you take the exam? It's actually at a testing center. So when you went through that scheduling process that you just did, and you just did it, right? You've already set it up for the exam testing center. It might be at a college. It might be at an educational facility that teaches live classes, but it's at a Pearson VUE testing center. So you'll go to that location to take the test. Make sure you take your proper identification and all of that information that will be sent to you in an email after your registration that you need to take with you for the exam. You're going to pass the exam if you get a score of 720 out of 1,000. All that information is in the actual exam blueprint document, the objectives themselves, if you want to be reminded of that later on. So that's what you want to do to be able to pass the exam. Go through this course and you'll be prepared for that exam that you just scheduled. You did just schedule it, right? Okay, good. Now, what do you do afterwards? So let's say you've scheduled that exam, you go through this course, you get some hands-on experience working in the AWS console with your free account, and then what do you do next? Well, the answer is keep working with AWS. Keep using AWS, and if you're interested in a career in AWS, keep on looking for new opportunities there. But in addition to that, realize this is the foundation. The AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate certification is the beginning place. There is more that you can learn about AWS. You can get into specialties like database specialties, big data specialties, security specialties, and you can also go up to the professional level. There are a lot of other options to continue your growth in AWS. Additionally, although I generally recommend Cloud Plus before AWS, if you've already done AWS, you might want to step back and become more general as well with the Cloud Plus certification, which could help you to get ready for things like Google Cloud Platform or Microsoft Azure and other platforms as well. So the key is keep learning the cloud, because if that's where your interest is, believe me, there are going to be plenty of opportunities for you in the future. I do want to tell you a little bit about the new exam released in 2020. The AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam went into beta actually in November of 2019, and I had the opportunity to go sit that beta exam, and I saw some interesting things. And one of the things that I noticed the most about it was you'll see a very big focus on S3 and how S3 integrates with other services. This is a big thing. So make sure you look at how that takes place. How do other services use S3? For example, a database service using S3 to store backups, or the database service importing databases from an S3 bucket to do a migration. That's what I mean by integration of other services with S3. So watch for those specific areas. Also, make sure you really do understand VPCs, subnets, routes, all of those things in detail. It is a big part of the exam. So the general things that I noticed were S3, VPCs, and EC2 instances. These are the big things. When you understand those three really well, I can't tell you an exact percentage, but it's a significant part of the exam, between 60 and 70%. So when you understand the details of those three things, you're going to be very, very advantaged as you go into this exam. And that is a little different than it used to be. The old exam to me was a lot broader than that. It seemed to be more spread across a lot of different things. But this one seems to have a heavy focus in these three areas, and it makes sense. They're the big three things people have to work with and configure in AWS to get started using the tool. So I think it's a good change, but it's one you need to know about. To get you started thinking about the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam, what I want to do is give you a bit of a tour of the objectives and help you understand what they're all about. And this will give you an overview of what's new in the new versions of the objectives. Now, before I go through these objectives in some detail for the newest version of the AWS exam, I want to compare it for you with the old version. So let's take a look at that. So notice when we look at it, on the left side here, we have SAA-C01. On the right side, we have SAA-C02. So the right side is the new version. And when we scroll to the point where the actual objectives are, what I really want to point out before taking the old objectives out of view is this domain table. Right here in the domain table, you can see in the old version there were 5 domains. In the new version, there are only 4. So the old version had domain 1 exactly as it is in the new version, and domain 2 Very similar. They said define performant architectures, and now it says design high-performing architectures. It effectively means the same thing. And then domain 3 was specify secure applications and architectures, and now it's design secure applications and architectures. And finally, domain 4 was design cost-optimized architectures, and that one's still the same. But notice domain 5 is simply completely gone, and the 6 points that it had have been distributed among the 4 other domains. Now, why am I pointing this out to you? Well, we have in this course, at the very end, an entire chapter that covered the old domain 5. We have made a decision. We're leaving it there for you because there's so much value in that knowledge about thinking about real-world scenarios and then applying AWS solutions to those scenarios that we wanted you to have that. So that information is still here at the end of the course in Chapter 15, and you're going to find it very valuable. But let's flip back now into the objectives and take a look at the specific objectives that are there within this course. So here we are looking at just the newest objectives. And you can see when looking at these objectives that we have, first of all, recommended knowledge, which is very important to know about. They recommend 1 year of hands-on experience designing available, cost-effective, fault-tolerant, and scalable distributed systems on AWS. And so the recommendation here is that you have a year of experience. Well, can you accomplish passing the exam without having a year of experience? My answer is absolutely. So what you can do is you can actually go through a training program that helps you focus on the areas you need to focus on in order to get that level of experience. And that's exactly what we do for you in this course. However, they do recommend hands-on experience working with compute, networking, storage, and database AWS services, as well as AWS deployment and management. And I recommend the same thing. So don't just go through this course. Get your own free AWS account and go in there and get some hands-on experience working with these things. They give you more suggestions here too, and I encourage you to look through those as well. Now, when we go further down into the document, that's where we get to the specific objectives. We have the knowledge domains, domain 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then they break them out into specific objectives that you need to know about. What I want to do right now is introduce you to the 4 knowledge domains, domain 1, domain 2, domain 3, domain 4, of the AWS certification that we're focusing on here, the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate. And I'm going to go through these domains and talk to you a little bit about the different things you might need to know. Now, don't be afraid. As I go through this, I might say something and you think, I don't even know what that word means. By the end of this course, you will. But I'm going to give you the information that you need to be looking for, these little knowledge nuggets to watch for as you go through the course to help you prepare for exam day. So in domain 1 with objective 1.1, design a multi-tier architecture solution. The things you want to keep in mind for the exam is, first of all, just understanding what a multi-tier architecture solution is. What does it mean to have multiple tiers? And of course, we'll be delivering that to you in this course. And then the other thing is, how in AWS can I actually implement a multi-tier solution once I understand it? Because you may be presented on the exam with scenarios where you have to select the right thing that helps to build a multi-tier architecture solution. 1.2 is design highly available and or fault-tolerant architectures. So here the things to keep in mind are issues like clustering within AWS and how do we implement clusters? If we want an EC2 instance cluster, how do we build that? And what are the options for deploying such a cluster? And then also in AWS RDS, how do we implement clustering and other high availability solutions for our databases? With 1.3, design decoupling mechanisms using AWS services. We need to understand how you can use AWS to break things apart. Because on the exam, you're likely to see questions on things like Lambda, which is a serverless function-based system within the AWS environment, and the API gateways in AWS, which are used to allow you to call functions from the cloud. So these are some examples of things that you might see in this area. And then 1.4 is choose appropriate resilient storage. So you need to understand the different storage types. EBS volumes, EFS volumes. You need to understand when to use the different types and how they're deployed within AWS for the exam. In domain 2, design high-performing architectures with objective 2.1, identify elastic and scalable compute solutions for a workload. You need to understand what AWS services give you elasticity. What can you do to grow or shrink things? So for the exam, this is about auto scaling. Make sure you understand what it offers to you in AWS. In 2.2, we're dealing with select high-performing and scalable storage solutions for a workload. So now we're addressing our storage. How do we make sure our storage can grow or shrink as we need it to? And that also does come back to auto scaling, but it also means understanding the way in which we configure our storage limits for EBS volumes and EFS volumes. 2.3, select high-performing networking solutions for a workload. Now we're dealing with the network structure that can be built within AWS. So for the exam, you need to know all about VPCs, subnets, subnet groups. You need to understand internet gateways, customer gateways, these types of things. You also need to understand the different rules that you can have in your environment. These rules are applied through network access control lists and security groups. And then also, it can be very useful to understand the different ways in which VPCs can communicate with each other. Finally, choose high-performing database solutions for a workload is the last of the domain 2 objectives, 2.4. So here what we need to understand is the basic features and capabilities of AWS RDS database systems. You don't have to go to the level of knowledge you do for the AWS Certified Database Specialty certification, but you're going to have a foundational knowledge of the database solutions in AWS so that you can choose the right one when given a scenario on the exam. In Domain 3, with Objective 3.1, we're focusing now on security. Design secure access to AWS resources. Here we need to make sure we understand identity and access management, IAM. So you've got to make sure you know how to work with users and groups and roles and policies which set the permissions that they can have, which are JSON policies. Do you know what JSON is? Well, you will when this course is over, and you need to know it for the exam. So make sure you focus on these security topics. 3.2 is design secure application tiers. Now, if we're going back to the beginning when we talked about multi-tier applications, we need to understand how to secure those different tiers. So you might have a web server, you might have a database server, you might have an application server. How do we keep them all secure in our AWS deployment? And finally, 3.3, select appropriate data security options. Now it's focusing on making sure that our data is secure. So we're back to our databases again. They can be managed through IaaS. They can also be managed through master accounts, they're often called. And we need to understand when to use those for the certification. Now that brings us to our last domain, and in Objective 4.1, identify cost-effective storage solutions, and 4.2, identify cost-effective compute and database services, and then 4.3, design cost-optimized network architectures. All of it is coming down to cost. So it means we need to understand how costs are accrued and what we're charged for within AWS. In some cases, it means that you're charged based off of CPU use, or that the thing is running, whatever that thing is in AWS. Sometimes it's based on the amount of storage you consume. Sometimes it's based on the number of calls to a service. That is, something asks the service to do something. That's a call. How many calls do you get? And how much do they cost you? Sometimes it's based on the type of instance that you implement for an EC2 instance or a database instance. And so all of these things you need to understand so you can grasp costing in AWS and be prepared for the exam. I want to wrap up our discussion of the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam specifically by talking to you about what I define as the 4 key areas to focus on. I know that we have the knowledge domains. We've covered those, and it's important for you to understand them. But if you focus on these 4 primary areas, it's going to cover 90% of what you see on the exam. These 4 areas are, first of all, compute. Now, compute is this fancy term for we're running virtual stuff in the cloud. So you might be running an entire virtual machine called an EC2 instance in the cloud, where it's a Linux machine or a Windows machine. Or you might be using one of the services that AWS provides, like AWS RDS, which really is kind of a crossover between compute and one of the other 4 areas, databases, that I'll get into more in a moment. So the point is, know how you can do computing tasks within AWS. That's really what you want to focus on here, and understand all the various ways you can do it and which solutions are best for particular scenarios. Then you have networking. Now within AWS, networking is a little different. It's all virtualized, but we have some of the same concepts we're used to in our local networks. So you're going to be looking at subnets and virtual private clouds. So within your cloud, you can have multiple different virtual private clouds that are separated from each other and that you could interconnect if you desired to. You have security, so you have sort of firewall kinds of things called NACLs or network access control lists, And then at the network interface card of each instance in EC2, you have something like a personal firewall that you might have on an individual server, and that's called a security group. So you've got different ways to deal with networking, and you need to understand those. Then you have your storage. And there's really two primary kinds of storage. There's what you might call live storage and archive storage, but there are different solutions for using this. When it comes to archive storage, you're dealing mostly with Amazon Glacier, and that's the one that lets you store large amounts of data for low costs, and then you can get it as you need it. But then we have our S3 buckets for live storage, and we also have volumes that are attached to EC2 instances for storage called EBS volumes. The point is, a lot of different storage. These terms might all be new to you, but by the time you're done with our full course, you're going to understand them all. Then the third thing that you need to keep in mind when you're dealing with storage is that database is a storage category, but it's also the fourth of our key areas. So there's some crossover between these. Databases are the lifeblood of many organizations. Our users, our different products that we might sell, our services that we offer, information about our employees, all of this stuff is put in databases. Well, AWS provides a very rich database solution called RDS. And with relational database services, you can host MySQL databases, SQL Server, Oracle databases, and custom proprietary databases that Amazon has built themselves. So remember, all four areas, compute, networking, storage, and databases. And as you're thinking about it, always ask, how do I do it in a secure way? As long as you keep that in mind, these four areas, do it in a secure way, you're going to cover 90+% of what's on the exam. Now that we've reviewed the actual AWS certification topics, I want to spend some more time talking to you about how you get mastery of knowledge in these various areas. When it comes to gaining mastery, there are really three things that I like to focus on. The first is learning the concepts. You need to learn conceptually what an S3 bucket is, what an EC2 instance is, what an RDS database instance is, and so forth. So you need to know the concepts. Then, to fully master it, you need to learn the process. How do I implement an S3 bucket? Because through that process, you're actually learning more about how it works. And then the third thing is learning the application of both the concepts and the process. Now, what we're talking about here is understanding how you actually implement these solutions. So you're dealing with the fact that there's a process and there is a concept. The concept says this tool can work for customer A. The process says, how does that tool work for customer A? So these are the key things to keep in mind when it comes to mastery. Now, when it comes to the methods that you can use to learn these concepts and processes, first of all, of course, you can use our e-learning. It's a great place to start. But it's also important to use AWS. Get in there and start working with it. Take advantage of that free account I showed you how to create and use it to actually implement these different conceptual solutions. And then guess what? You're going to use AWS again, but differently. So in other words, there are different ways to get the job done inside of AWS. And you want to work with all of those different ways. That's how you gain mastery. So remember, learn the concepts, learn the processes, learn the application of both, and then get in there and use it. Now, I told you previously that the key to mastery of these knowledge areas is, at least in part, getting into AWS and using it. So let me talk to you about ways that you can get some experience in AWS. Start by creating an account. That's the first step, right? Because you have to have the account to actually use the system. And then use free services and free types or classes. So the different solutions in there, they have different types of EC2 instances, different classes of EBS volumes, and so forth. And by using all of these different ones, you get exposure to what they can and cannot do. Create an S3 bucket. So you've done this and you've seen its features and capabilities. Create VPCs or virtual private clouds. Create subnets, security groups, NACLs, EC2 instances, databases. And if I've just said some terms that you said, wait, what was that? Don't worry, it's all covered in detail in the full course. But what I want you to grasp here is that you need to get in there and work with these things and create them. And another thing I encourage you to do is use the online documentation. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how to use that documentation now. So in this demonstration, I want to show you briefly the AWS documentation. The AWS documentation is some of the most thorough documentation I've seen provided by any service provider in the history of working in IT, and I've been working in IT since the early 1990s. And I know for some that makes me old, but I've been working in the industry a while, and I've never seen the documentation with the depth that is available here. It's not necessarily the best reading to sit down and learn necessarily, but when you are trying to solve a problem you're facing while working with AWS, the documentation is phenomenally helpful. Let's say, for example, you want to work with S3 buckets. We created one briefly earlier in this introductory course. You would simply click on Amazon S3 under Storage, and then you'll see you have 4 things: Getting Started Guide, Developer Guide, API Reference, and Console User Guide. Now, some people have offline documentation stores where they store documentation so that they can search it in a central interface. For example, you might use some type of an ebook tool like Calibre so that you can actually have all of your PDFs in one place and then you can search them. Well, that's not a bad idea generally, but let me just forewarn you that AWS documentation is updated continually because AWS is updated continually. And so if you have a PDF from 2 years ago, it's probably outdated. So I would really encourage you to use the online help as much as possible within AWS. So if we just want to know how to create an S3 bucket, we can go to the Get Started Guide, click HTML, and then you can see right here's a link, Create a Bucket. And immediately it takes you into the step-by-step procedures to create a bucket. You can also, under Getting Started, choose to view Amazon S3 Basics. And in here, you can see just the basics of Amazon S3. There's also a where do I go from here in many of these. And this can be good because it'll give you use case scenarios. It will give you various considerations you want to keep in mind when working with S3. It will let you know about possibly advanced features that the service might offer. And then there may be development resources if you're going to do programming related to S3 and reference resources. So this is where you'll have a user guide, API references for coders, things like that. So as you can see, it's exhaustive documentation. But in addition, you can search in the documentation. So if I search for encryption here within the S3 documentation, you can see I didn't find any matches for encryption. Well, let's go back and let's try to search for encrypt. See if that's in there. Still nothing. But what's happening? Well, it's looking at this guide. So this is an important thing to understand. You can search the entire site. You can search case studies. You can search all documentation, or look at this. You can search documentation for this product. I click on search, and now look at that. I have resilience in Amazon S3. It apparently talks about encryption in that article related to Amazon S3. I can back up and say, let's search all documentation and see what I get. And now you can see that I'm still just getting the resilience in Amazon S3. So the point is I have a search engine that's built in that allows me to locate help on the specific topics that I might need. So that gives you a brief overview of the documentation. So remember, the experience is about getting in there and doing it. And the good thing with AWS is you can get in there and do it with zero cost. So you can start using the system, and that's the best way to gain mastery of these knowledge areas. When I'm talking to people about preparing for exams, I always like to spend just a little bit of time talking about note-taking. Because a lot of people think of note-taking as a very monolithic thing. There's one way to do it, and it's how a teacher sometime when I was young told me to do it, and it is just write down little things that you think might be important to remember. Well, that's part of it. But let me talk to you about 2 different categories of note-taking. There's text notes, and there are also visual notes. Text notes are full sentences. You might write out a definition, for example, or they can be quick facts. They can be features of a system. So you might write S3 and then write the different features it has, like encryption and the ability to use nested folder type structures by using prefixes and so forth. So you may jot down features as you go along. And then there are capabilities. What can RDS do? What can EC2 do? What can Beanstalk or Elastic Beanstalk do? So you can jot down the different capabilities of the system as well as the features. And you might even jot down applications, ideas for applications. Now, those are text notes, and that's kind of the traditional way to take notes. But a very powerful note-taking technique is visual notes. And a lot of people think, well, I'm not an artist, so I can't do this. But remember, you're drawing them for you, so you don't have to be an artist. It just has to be meaningful to you. Iconic memory is very, very powerful. So visual note-taking is also very powerful. And you can do diagrams, for example. So they could be service diagrams. Maybe a diagram of how a particular service works and other services that it interconnects with. A network diagram. So you could draw a virtual private cloud, and then you could draw subnets in there, and then EC2 instances in there, and so forth. You can do process diagrams. So when data comes in through one EC2 instance, it sends it to the other one, which sends it to the other one, and they all intercommunicate together, and you can diagram all of that. Great way to remember things. And then here's one you might not have thought of, but it's amazing and powerfully creative, and that's cartoons. Now again, you might say, wait, I'm not an artist. But cartoons are great ways to remember things. You can draw just little stick figures if you have to, and put little blurbs there of them saying things that you want to actually remember. You'll be amazed if you give those techniques a try. They're very powerful. So when it comes to note-taking, remember, it's not just about text. You can also have visual notes, but remember your different text notes type. And also keep in mind that those notes you've taken, if it's a notebook full or if it's just 10 pages, those are the last things I encourage you to take a look at right before you go into the exam. Now, I want to take a little bit of time now to talk to you about two of the most important elements of preparation that you can focus on leading up to exam day. And that's mental and physical preparation. This is one of the most important sets of preparatory tasks that you can go through getting ready for an exam. And it doesn't matter if it's a certification exam, a college exam, or any other test. You being the best you that you can be is key. So let's talk first about mental preparation. Obviously, it begins with knowing the topic. You need to do the study. You need to learn the materials and take advantage of the different concepts we've talked about in this introductory course to help you accomplish that. You also need to know your learning style. Different people learn best in different ways. Some people learn best in small chunks. Some people learn best with long, deep dives for a period of time. Some people learn best while just watching e-learning, and others watch e-learning and also do the things that are being demonstrated to them. And others watch the e-learning, do the things being demonstrated, and read a book. So know how you learn best. Test yourself. Test your knowledge. So use practice tests and so forth so you can test where you are and then look at those weak areas and improve. And then repeat. Go through that process as many times as you need to until you have the knowledge that you need. And think positive. You want to be confident on exam day, and part of that means thinking confident thoughts. I remember one time I went to take an exam, and when I went up to the individual to register for the exam and go in to take the certification exam, he said to me the following phrase, "Oh, you're taking that exam." And I thought, what? I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, we haven't had anyone pass that yet." Let me just say that's not the nicest thing to do to someone right before they go in to take the exam. But thankfully, I had taken a lot of certification exams, and I was confident in my knowledge and in my abilities, and I did go in and I did pass the test. Confidence is key. If you run into that scenario and you're not confident, you might be in trouble. So make sure you're mentally prepared. Now, make sure you're physically prepared. What does this mean? Well, it means that to be the best you can be mentally, you need to be the best you can be physically, because that's when your brain works the best. So you want to sleep well several nights before the exam. Don't get 4 hours of sleep 3 nights in a row, and then the night before the exam you sleep 8 hours. Get good sleep several nights in a row. Exercise as best for you the morning of the exam. This gets the energy going and gets you into a good state of mind mentally for that exam. Drink plenty of water in the days leading up to the exam. Don't wait until the day of the exam. Do it in the days leading up. There are various research studies that show us if we're dehydrated, our mental faculties are weakened. So you want to be the best you can be there. Eat healthy foods. Avoid sugars, for example, leading up to the exam. Eat those things that are best for, again, mental functionality. Sit with good posture during the exam. Now, you might wonder why this is. Your brain works best when you have oxygen. And if you're slumped over and you're not sitting with good posture, you're not breathing as well, you're not getting the oxygen, your brain doesn't function as well. You might also throughout the exam either stand and stretch if you're allowed for a moment during the exam, or if required, you can just stretch in the chair. Don't hesitate to pause. stretch, rejuvenate a little bit in the middle of that exam. That can help you out a lot. If you deal with a question that's really challenging, pause after that question. Take a few deep breaths before you go on to the next question. Mental and physical preparation are key to any exam success. So what's the final thing you do? You take the exam. Well, what I'm going to do right now is I can't take you in to take the exam with you. So what I am going to do is show you at Amazon's website the practice questions that they have there. They call them sample questions. And so you can get an idea of what you're in for. So we're going to take a look at those questions now and see what typical questions on the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam might look like. In this final demonstration in this introductory course, I wanted to show you a little bit about what the exam questions might look like. Now, of course, exam items themselves, they're called, or exam questions, are private, and anyone who takes an exam basically agrees to an NDA that they will not reveal any questions on the exam. So I can't show you actual exam questions, of course, but what I can do is show you these sample exam questions. Now, these are available at AWS website. So if you did a search, say in your favorite search engine like Google for AWS sample test questions or sample exam questions, you'll find this easily. So the way the questions are worded is really important. I want you to pay close attention to this. Notice that question number 1 gives you a scenario and then says which solution will meet the security team's mandate. Notice it doesn't say what is the third step in implementing the solution the security team requires. No, it says which solution will meet the security team's mandate. Then the next one, which services are suitable for storing session state data? Okay, the next one, which action will protect against unintended user actions? Which option will meet these requirements? Let's look at number 5. Which Amazon EBS volume type can meet the performance requirements of this application? Are you noticing a pattern? So this is the Solution Architect Associate exam. The key here is to know what to use in a scenario, or what action to take in a scenario, but not necessarily know the detailed steps of those actions. That's going to be more in the SysOps certification. Here, the focus is on what can I do when a certain scenario arises, or what is the best solution given the requirements of an organization, or what service will do a certain thing. Okay, so these are the key things to keep in mind. And this is the reason I wanted you to see these sample exam questions, so you get a very clear understanding of the types of questions you're going to see on the AWS Solutions Architect Associate exam. Focus on what the different services do, what actions might be taken if certain scenarios arise, and so forth. And you'll find it very helpful. Now, this is the reason that I always recommend a tip to people studying for AWS architect exams, and that is read the case studies in the AWS documentation. Read 1, read 10, read as many as you can, because what do? They give you a scenario and then how that scenario was implemented in AWS, or a problem and how that problem was solved in AWS. And that's what the architect exams are all about. So this gives you a nice overview of what you might expect on exam day. In this introductory course, we've looked at a lot of information. We've seen what AWS is all about, what it does for us, and what it can do. We've seen why we might choose to use AWS. We've looked at AWS certifications in general and the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam specifically. We've even seen some tips on how to prepare for the exam and be the best us that we can be on exam day. We've looked at some sample test questions, and now we've come to the end of our introductory course. I want to thank you for viewing this course. And now that you've seen this, you're prepared to jump right in and get into our AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate full e-learning course, where you're going to learn the ins and outs and details of all the major features of AWS. So don't delay. Get in there now and get started on your certification journey.